stop and listen to me first before you start your black soldier fly farm in the north. Why? Because there's some really important things to consider before you just jump right in. Hi, I'm Rita and welcome to Queen Worm Farm, and this is the first video in many in this series as I'm going to explain in detail how to raise black soldier flies in the north. And I'm going to first give you the location of where I am. I'm in northern Alberta, Canada. So if you're not familiar with the weather that I have in my area, it is cold. Let me tell you, our summers are 2.5 months out of the year. We may get 30 degrees Celsius, but we're more like between 15 degrees Celsius to around 25 is the average daytime temperature. Now, nighttime temperature, we can drop all the way down to 1 or 2 degrees in the evening, even in the middle of summer. So right away, big red flags should go up, go, hey, I definitely cannot raise black soldier flies outside. It is not going to happen. The other thing about our weather is that we literally are in a deep freeze most of the time. Winter can start as early as October and go all the way to the end of March. April, we're still in freezing temperatures at night. In May, we might be half of the month, we're in freezing temperatures, and then we slowly start climbing the ladder and we get up to 5-6 degrees in the evening. So if you put that all into perspective, there is no way we are going to be raising these flies outside. Raising black soldier flies in the north is not impossible. I do it, and I feed my quails and my chickens and my ducks and my geese with them without a problem. The thing is that it has to be inside, and that's exactly where the trials can come in if you're not fully prepared on what you're going to be doing inside the house. So I'm going to mention a few things that you should really consider before jumping in to this awesome adventure on raising black soldier flies. So the very first thing you really want to consider is the food source. What are you going to feed these maggots? Now, these are like seriously super maggots. Okay, I've raised mealworms, I've raised crickets before, and these guys are serious when it comes to eating, and they will eat a lot. So what you want to consider is there enough scrap waste on your homestead? Now, I'm assuming that if you want to raise black soldier flies, you are feeding something en masse, because you're not just going to feed one little reptile. You're going to be feeding out to the chickens, to the ducks, maybe to the pigs, maybe to the fish, something where you need a lot of food for. So homestead, or maybe a business, something like that. You really need to find an outside source, because even on my homestead, these larvae are not going to eat hay. They're not going to eat scrap hay. They're not carbon eaters. They're nitrogen eaters. So they can eat greens. So let's say you pull a ton of weeds or get rid of, some leaves, but really they like the carbs. They like hamburger buns. They like things with flour and grain. They love pasta. They love meat. They love all kinds of meat. They're not picky when it comes to that, but they do love protein. They love any kind of vegetable that they can get into. So you need to really think about the variety of foods. You want to give them those variety of foods, otherwise they're just going to start crawling out of your bin and you're going to have no end of maggots everywhere on the floor. So do not think that just giving them leaves or scrap outside when it comes to plants is going to sustain them. It is not going to sustain them. in my nursery, what I call my nursery, and you'll understand that a little bit later, that's where I put my eggs to hatch. I use manure, so we have cattle, so I definitely use fresh manure for that, and I'll explain that later. But you can also use sheep and goat or pig. This is not where you want to use manure from birds, but if you do have access to cow manure or pig manure, goat or sheep, then you got definitely a base attractant and a food source for the baby maggots. Now, this is not something that the large maggots, as they really feed and grow, it doesn't sustain them, but it's definitely critical to the beginning stages. And I'll explain that as we go, but if you got that or have access to that, maybe a farmer next to you or something like that, that's a very, very good start. So think about maybe getting hooked up with a local restaurant, getting all their scrap waste, or a grocery store or a bakery or something like that. See if you can get hooked up with them where you can use that scrap waste to feed those larvae. Super important to really have that organized before you start. The next thing to think about is heat. These Black soldier flies live in tropical areas. We're not tropical, so we need to supply them with heat. So in your fly cage, there definitely needs to be a heating source. They're gonna like it around that 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, so it's gotta be warm. The other thing is the larva in their tubs needs under heat. You can't just put a tub and let it at room temperature. They will eat, but it's going to be super slow. They're not going to go into their stages and morph into their last stage and then into a fly if there is no heat source. So you need heating under the tubs. Plus, you also need heating at that last stage where they're changing from that larva to the fly stage. They need heat and humidity. If there is no heat, this whole thing just collapses. The flies won't breed, the larva won't grow, yada yada yada, just everything will just completely collapse. The eggs won't hatch. On kind of the same side as the heat, they need humidity. Think tropical. So if there's not enough humidity in the fly cage or the love cage that those flies are in, they're not going to breed. They're not going to lay their eggs. The eggs are not going to hatch. As the larva stage, humidity is not as important once they're hatched. As long as they got food and warmth, larvae are happy, seriously happy. So things to think about there is heat and humidity. You definitely have got to get that right. Otherwise, this whole cycle doesn't work. The other thing to consider is just generally knowing about these flies. Like, don't just jump into it and think, yeah, they're just flies, no problem. I got some maggots, no big deal. I've got this, no problem. And then guess what? Things just fail because you're assuming that this is easy. You're assuming that you know it. Well, guess what? Do your research. Really understand what makes the Black soldier fly breed. What makes them happy? Where do they like to breed? When do they like to breed? What temperature do they breed at? What do they lay their eggs in? How do their eggs hatch? How long do their eggs hatch? All those things you really, really need to understand their life cycle. When they're in larva stage, what stages do they go through to go from larva to fly stage? What happens there? What is needed for all those stages? And you have to mimic that. You have to provide that. So if you don't do the research and you just think, I'm just going to order some, jump right in, and I'll figure it out, they're going to die before you even get to the fly stage. So if you're really serious about raising Black soldier flies in the north, Get acquainted with these flies. They are amazing, absolutely amazing. But you really need to do your research. Watch, videos from Africa or Mexico and South America and all those places that have black soldier fly larvae, or people who are raising them. Watch them, understand them, read all about them on Google or wherever you're doing research. Really begin to understand, and that will definitely help you in problem solving when things go wrong. The other really important thing that is so overlooked before you get started in raising these is time. Don't underestimate the amount of time needed to properly care for these maggots and flies. On average, I spend about an hour to an hour and a half a day maintaining my maggots. One, you got to check all those tubs every single day because they are hungry. And things can go from just fine to really bad in 24 hours. You could have a tub that is just fine when you fed it and now is swimming and all the maggots want to crawl out because there's way too much moisture because of what you fed them. So you need to fix that tub ASAP. You could have so many issues from when you fed or when you looked at it the one day to the next that you really need to be on top of your tubs. You cannot just walk away for a week. You feed and then walk away. It is disaster waiting to happen. You cannot do that. They need constant maintenance in those tubs. They need to be moved. The substrate needs to be moved to add oxygen in, or you are going to run into a huge amount of problems. So you need to be able to budget an hour to an hour and a half a day. Every 4 days, I call it the big overhaul or nursery day because that is when I'm harvesting eggs and I am putting them in the nursery and I'm taking the new maggots out of the nursery into a new tub and blah, blah, blah. A whole bunch of maintenance goes on there. Things need to get done. A, B, C, D, E, F, G on that evening needs to happen, and that takes me from an hour and a half to 2 hours on top of the regular maintenance. So you need to be able to devote your time to them properly in order to raise them, because this isn't an open compost pile or a closed compost pile outside where you're attracting the flies lay, and suddenly, bam, you have maggots, and bam, they grow. It doesn't work that way. You are responsible for every stage of life that these maggots go through and the fly stage. So where warmer countries kind of have it a lot easier than us is because the flies are already native and all you need to do is attract them and they already lay their eggs where they're supposed to, and all you have to do is take care of the maggots. You don't have to worry about hatching the eggs or taking care of the flies. But in the north, you do. So that adds a lot more time to what you have to do, but it's rewarding. It is so rewarding to be able to grow your own food for your livestock, whether that's the birds, the pigs, the fish, whatever you have. It is amazing. Now, this is the very last one I really need you to think about before you jump into black soldier fly raising. Your setup. One, where are you going to set up? I have my setup in my basement, and black soldier fly raising is a little bit smelly. So you need to have an area where you can have a little bit of odor, but it's not going to like creep all over the house. There's definitely ways to control the odor of those larvae eating so much food, but no matter what you're going to do, you're going to have a bit of odor. So definitely be aware of that when it comes to where you want to set up your operation. you need to be able to have 5 or 6 Rubbermaids. Just the standard size Rubbermaids, you definitely need to be able to have that somewhere where you can put them on top of heating mats, because it's very important to keep these larvae warm. So you definitely need space for that. The other thing is you need space for the cage. For the love cage is what they call it for the flies. You need areas to have enough, you need enough plugs to plug in several heating pads that are pretty big in length. Plus I have about 4 to 5 other smaller heating pads for another stage of life. We'll get to that in other videos. Plus you also need a plug for the cage light, because I have a ceramic heating bulb in there. Plus I have a light in that cage that is on a timer. The cage, you also need areas for the cage. Now my cage is 1.5 meters tall. So you need an area where you got height over width. So very important. I have about 1.5 meters in height by 2 feet by 2 feet. So you definitely need some room there. If you want a bigger operation, that means you would need a bigger love cage and you need more Rubbermaids. Now I choose Rubbermaids because I like to have a lid, and I'll show you how to, do up that. But I like to contain my maggots because I don't want them crawling out. If you see a lot of videos from Africa or other places, they will have tubs with maggots wide open. Great, that works there. But when it comes to my house, I definitely don't want larvae escaping, especially when they're in that doop. I'm just going to go over here to get out of this tub and work on my fly stage and start to morph. That does not work in the house. So we definitely want to be able to contain things and also not have fruit flies in our tubs as well, and I'll cover all of that in later videos. So that is it for the very first video. Stay tuned for the next video as we are going to dive in depth on the Black Soldier Fly stages of life. So stay tuned and I'll see you on the next video.